Well, what I would like to do in the next 20 minutes I have is to discuss something which is really not so common to do, with trying to figure out a future which is really far away into the 21st century. And I will try to really condense my thesis into those 20 minutes. But I would like to introduce you to my new book, in which I really elaborate on this issue. I will mention it later on. What I really was interested in lately was trying to figure out the answers to two questions that are not common in the literature at this point of time in history. The first one is an old question that many people have tried to address, and there are libraries that are filled with some suggestions to this question. I would like to add to that library another perspective, and I was hoping that I would be able to do it in one single book. So that was at least my first intention. The second question that I was really interested in was, is there a way to foresee decades before world conflicts are developing and see how they will be reflected specifically in the Middle East? And really, forgive me about the next note, because most of the people think that futurists are trying to figure out what the future would look like. However, genuine futurists know exactly that it's not the future they are seeking. What they are seeking is to take a look at the present from a very different perspective, and that's how I would like you at least to see whatever I'm going to discuss in the next minutes. So I was interested in those two things, and I have elaborated them into this book. If you want to exercise your Hebrew, you are welcome to read it. However, I'm going to really try and make some sense of what I came up with in this book, as in a nutshell, as much as I can. What I asked myself was the following. I said to myself, what if I was in 1910 and I had in hand a methodology with which I would have foreseen at least something like 50 to 60% of what happened in the first half of the 20th century. I said to myself, 50%. If I were in 1910, if I was to foresee, just 4 years later, the First World War, the collapse of great empires, the Second World War, the Holocaust from the Jewish point of view at least, I said, I'm going to make some efforts to take that methodology and see if I can come up with different ideas, different insights of what might happen in the next 40 years up to the mid-21st century. And I was looking very hard for a methodology. It's not an easy thing to see a methodology such as this one in the literature of at least future studies. Most of the people really avoid this kind of thinking. Reaching 4 decades ahead is really mind-boggling to many people. So what I came up with is a methodology that brings together a very specific driving forces from very far fields that most of the people are not used to bring together. And with that intersecting driving forces, with those intersecting driving forces, I have developed a methodology with which I believe we can see the present from a very different angle. And this is actually the most important thing I would like to stress. It's not trying to understand the future, it's really trying to understand the present, because what most of us are doing is just what we call linear extrapolations. Most of the people now, what they tend to do is take whatever they see developing at the moment, and they extrapolate them in a very linear way into the future. What's so unique about this kind of methodology is that it aims at figuring out the curves in history. And what we have seen in the 20th century is really a variety of curves that this methodology, at least if it was to be used in 1910, as far as I know, it was able to foresee at least something like 50% of what happened. So I don't have time to really elaborate on all of those driving forces. I'm going to touch upon two of them very, very briefly, just to open our mind and to see whatever is happening at this point of time in history can be seen from a very different angle, and it can give us some sense of maybe how to deal with those challenges in the future, again, from a very different angle. I'm going to bring together then really very briefly some trends that are shaping world history in the first half of this 21st century. Let's take a very broad perspective to what happened to a population in the last at least 12,000 years. And again, as far as we know, about 12,000 years there were worldwide around 5 million people. Take a look, we've barely grown. There were times even that we have shrunken. And then 2,000 years ago, we reached 250 million people worldwide. But then something unusual has happened, and we have grown in a very exponential way, which means it took us only 1,800 years until we reached 1 billion people. But then when we reached that 1 billion people mark, we have started really going nuts in terms of, again, population growth, which means, again, it took us only 130 years to double that number to 2 billion people, and then only 30 years to add another billion, and then only 15 years to add another billion, and only 12 years to add another billion. We know from systems theories that this growth cannot continue forever. We know that something is going to happen. And a lot of studies are being done trying to understand what would happen and when something would happen so that that growth will stop and will go again to a normal pace of growth, if you wish. As far as we know, worldwide population at this point of time is around 7 billion people. And the estimates, just a couple years ago, the estimates was that by the year 2050, worldwide population will reach between 11 to 13 billion people. However, in the last couple years, we have found two trends that I'm going to discuss in the next slide, from which we have deducted that probably we're going to grow a little bit less than that, and the estimates right now are that we'll reach around 9 to 10 billion people by the year 2050. However, because of the trends I'm going to discuss in the next slides, with the estimates, and by far most of the experts do agree to what you're going to see at this point, is that by the end of the 21st century, human population is going to shrink back to 5 to 6 billion people. Now, I'm bringing in front those numbers because a lot of things are being shaped and designed by those kind of trends. And I will hint on those trends later on. The trends we have discovered is as follows. At this point of time, worldwide, for every 100 females, there are about 117 males. This is the first time in human history that there are more males than females as far as we know again. And there should be some impact of this phenomena on societies, specifically on the drive of a lot of people that don't have a biological horizon to their future. We know from the past that when a very specific culture or a group of people have experienced such a thing, most of the time they have become so cruel. And most of the time they have invaded other cultures, other groups, slaughtered everybody and took their kids for slaves or for mates, if you wish. This is the first trend. It's not across the board. Not all the countries are having that phenomena. The democratic countries are somehow balanced. For example, in Israel, we are balanced, but most of the democratic countries are balanced. The problem is with other countries. This is the first trend. The second trend is that this second trend really is a phenomena also in the democratic countries, which means that for every 100 mothers nowadays, in their fertility age, of course, there are only about 64 young girls up to the age of 18, which means humankind is not producing enough, if you wish, females for the future. And there is a lot of literature trying to understand how that phenomena is going to impact specifically world relations and, of course, national security in different places, because we know from history it has a great impact on national security. Take, for example, what's happening very specifically in the Middle East area. Take a look at what's happening. And there are a lot of implications already to this trend. In Egypt, there are already 5% more males than females. As far as we know, during at least centuries, there were more females than males in Islamic countries, and this is the first time there are more males than females. In Jordan, 6% more. In Syria, 6% more. In Saudi Arabia, 20% more of males than females. We know that at least fundamentalism, as it is being perceived at this point of time, at least part of the reason it has been developed is because of this trend. Now, the Saudis understood it, so they were trying to address that challenge. This is a very unique challenge that they have never addressed. So one of the way they were trying to address it is to open a lot of madrasas so that they'll contain that energy of a lot of males. Of course, we all know the impact of those madrasas. This is the second, a very important demographic trend. It's being termed at this point of time in the literature as the demographic winter. As far as we know, for millennials, there were worldwide about 15% of world population of age of 5 years and under, and about 3% of world population that were 65 years and older. However, in the last 40, 50 years, take a look what happened. By 2020, we're going to go through a very important point of time, after which only 40 years later, we are going to see a reverse of millennials, in which there will be worldwide around 17% of people aged 65 and older, and only 5% of world population of 5 years and under. Now, by all means, we have never experienced such a thing in such a scale. So a lot of people are trying to understand the impact of this trend. I don't think we really grasp how this thing is going to affect all of us. We know that a society without a biological horizon, without a future, actually, those kids are the future of all of us. Without enough kids, a lot of things might happen, and we are trying to understand it. This methodology, as I said, it brings a lot of things together. And take a look how this trend is going to affect in the next 20 years. A lot of countries, for example, Russia is going to lose 20% of its population. Now, losing 20% of your population, you cannot continue as you are. And the most difficult thing to understand at this point of time is how it's going to affect the decision-making of the leaders in the next 20 years. If we can learn something from the past, we think we can learn something from the past, then most of the time leaders and cultures are becoming very cruel, very frightened. Actually, with this methodology is bringing together a lot of fears that are driving people to take decisions, even though they do not want to take those kind of decisions. Let me take you, again, very briefly to something which is really frightening, against the common knowledge at this point of time. But the impact of those trends is far-reaching than most of us can even imagine. Take a look what happens to the fertility rate in the last 50 years, and an estimate about the fertility rate in around 2050. Most of the world is going less to 2.1, which is the replacement rate of any population. So what we're going to see, a devastating feeling of a lot of cultures in the next 40 years. And that feeling, or if you wish, that kind of fear is going to drive us to do imaginable things. And if you wish to understand what might happen in the Middle East specifically, take a look. Against common knowledge again, what we see in the Arab countries, at least that are surrounding Israel, and not only surrounding Israel, you see a devastating trend in which most, if not all, of the Arab countries and the Muslim countries are going down the replacement rate of populations. And what kind of fears, what kind of challenges the leaders are going to address because of this trend. Again, let me give you the fears, if you wish, of the Israelis and specifically the world Jewry. I don't have time, so I'm going to rush a little bit. If you wish, about 3,000 years ago, in the biblical times, there were only about 1 million people, Jews worldwide, and about 200 years ago, we have reached barely 3 million Jews, and then something really happened, and we have reached, in a matter of 140 years, we did sixfolds. We reached 18 million people worldwide, which brought a devastating Holocaust to us because it was driven, at least part of it, because of the fear of such a demographic boom has caused, at least in Europe. And still, we barely have recovered from that Holocaust, and we are driven from a fear that is running in the veins of our DNA, if you wish. We estimate that by the year, we are right now in Israel, 6 million Jews and 7.5 million habitats, if you wish. But the estimate is that by the year 2050, we will reach about 18 million Jews worldwide again. And in Israel, the estimate is that we will be around 15 million Jews, which brings to the area, to the Middle East, some fears that they are not used to, and we have to address them too. Okay, so the idea of the theoretical framework, at least, of this methodology is to bring those driving forces around a much larger theoretical framework in order really to understand what might happen in the next few decades. So again, the demographic driving force is speaking about the next grand picture. As far as we know, the Homo sapiens was born somewhere in Africa, and it took around 5,000-6,000 years to emigrate and invade Asia. And in the last 5,000 years, the vector of emigration was from east to west. We are still in that vector, in the last 500 years, people in the Western Hemisphere at least were overwhelmed with that vector, because if you go and analyze how a lot of cultures, how a lot of nations have developed, is because of that invasion specifically. So what happened in the last 500 years? People looked for new spaces to go and emigrate and populate. Now we know that if you wish, the game of that invasion, or the trends and the vectors of that invasion, is colliding specifically in Eurasia. A lot of studies have been done trying to understand how those emigration waves and invasions have accumulated in Eurasia. And again, probably we are still experiencing, at least in the next 40 years, the aftermath of those trends that are moving westwards. What happens in Turkey actually is exactly that phenomena in which East is moving toward West, and is having a lot of impact on cultures, on ideas, on ideologies, on religions, etc., etc. So probably what we're going to see in the next 40 years, some impacts of those vectors exactly on this area in which Russia would look towards going back to Eastern European countries, and it will have, again, a lot of impact on how the U.S. is going to react to it. And of course, as far as we know, the U.S. is going to try to deal with that vector in a different way than Europeans have done it during the 20th century. And most of the idea is that they are looking for a new ally, which is probably Turkey, to deal with this invasion or emigration, if you wish, and trying to encounter that invasion from in the Caucasus, in which probably we're going to see in the next 20, 30 years a lot of, if you wish, terror in that area. Unfortunately, my time is over, so I would like, really in a nutshell, just to mention the conclusion of that methodology. So, if you wish, Turkey is becoming a regional superpower again. It was sleeping for some 80 years. Now it's awakening, and there are a lot of nations that are willing that Turkey will take a role in this region, because for centuries, if not millennials, people that used to live here were taking a very positive role into balancing powers in the Middle East. And then probably Syria and Lebanon will be backed by Russia to start an asymmetric war against Israel, because they would like to take some pressure from their borders over there. As far as we know, Israel will not tolerate that kind of activities. We have our fears, and as any other culture, when you have great fears that are driving you, you become so cruel that even you and your leaders cannot even imagine that you can take such actions. And again, what the methodology is pointing to is that the Israelis will not have any choice but to do a very large land maneuver in order to stop that if you wish, missile attacks and stuff like that. And I would like to finish with a very important point. Now, we are looking with our methodologies to see the curves, how history is really developing. We do not believe that history is developing in a very linear way. So we're looking for those curves. The methodology brings me to understand that there are some great forces that are working all together. And from time to time, some forces, some vectors are having the upper hands. And it can be seen that the tension within Turkey is bringing from time to time different parts of the parties over there to have the upper hand. And it seems to be that part of the role that the West and the US is going to give Turkey is to take care of some failed nations in the Middle East, and Turkey will take a very important role. What I believe is that by the end of the fourth decade of the 21st century, Israel will have some kind of relationship with Turkey that will be much more fundamentalist and will develop some tendencies to be against Europe and against the U.S. But what I believe is that a window of opportunity will open to the Israelis and the Middle Eastern countries, that Turkey will be able to bring together those parties and to sign a peace accord. As far as I can understand from that methodology, is that there is a great chance, if we really understand the forces that are working, to take it into consideration at this point of time in order to build the building blocks for such a window of opportunity really to materialize by the mid-21st century. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go further. What I would like to do is just to introduce you to my website. I will be publishing these slides tonight, and I hope we'll be able to watch it and to use it as much as you can. Thank you very much.